Is everyone all here?
Hi, Ani. It's Joe.
Hey.
I think we're ready to go ahead and get started.
Okay, super.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinar. This month, we're really excited to have with us Ani Collum from Retail Concepts, a retail consulting business out of the Boston, Massachusetts area. Ani has a long history of merchandising and marketing in a variety of retail companies, a lot of larger companies that you're familiar with, Tommy Hilfiger, Macy's, TJ Maxx, and some others. But she's since turned a lot of her interest and her expertise towards helping newer and smaller retail companies get up and running, everything from the startup phase to really identifying new growth opportunities and growth strategies for multi-channel strategies for brick and mortar retailers as well as e-commerce retailers as well. So Ani is going to take us through a basic today of just some open to buy and learning more about how we can better identify what we should be spending and really what we should be using to buy appropriately for future planning for your business. So Ani, I'm going to turn it over to you. You want to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you. And as Joe had mentioned, I have this balance of like corporate background, but then also small business. And, I was kind of classically trained and open to buy. But then when I switched over to launching my own businesses and then working with others doing that, I realized that there's a huge void in terms of helping smaller retailers truly understand what the concepts of open to buy are and why it's important to manage your inventory and how to do that. So we're going to kind of take a open to buy 101 approach to today. It's somewhat high level, certainly available for questions or to talk through any of this after the fact on another day. But for now, we'll just kind of go through the basics, and then we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So if you guys want to hold your questions, and we can go through them then. So essentially, we're here to obviously talk about open to buy and specifically, what it is, why it's important, and how it can help with your business. The topic of open to buy is one that comes up quite a bit with retailers, as many people know how to use it, but they don't have a complete grasp on exactly what it is and how to go about using it for their business. So really high level, what is an open to buy plan? Essentially, it's an inventory management tool that ultimately helps you determine how much merchandise you need to buy on a monthly basis to support your sales goals, both based on what's going on in your business today, but then also, almost more importantly, what's going to be happening in the future. It essentially compares your plan to your actual performance and then adjusts the dollars that you have to spend on merchandise each month based on like how close you're coming to your plan. So it's basically telling you how much money you have to spend on inventory in a given month to be able to do the right level of business for your store. And it's essentially the difference between how much inventory is needed to do your sales versus how much is available to you to sell to your customers between what you have on the floor right now, what you have on order, and then what else is needed to kind of fill in. So looking at your business in an open to buy format is super eye-opening because it gives you an inventory goal to get to, a sales number to reach, and essentially just helps you become more proactive of a buyer. But long story short, at the end of the day, it's really just a guideline for the amount of dollars that you have to spend on merchandise for your business. So what does an open to buy plan look like? It's somewhat difficult to show a very detailed open to buy plan in this format, so I want to pull out a couple of key things for you guys just so that you can get your arms a little bit around the tangible side of it. This is very much a truncated view and a very quick snapshot, but at a high level, what you would be looking at here is your forecasted inflow plan for a month. And then you take out what you already have on order that's in your system, which is super important to always have your inventory on order in the system. A lot of retailers don't because it takes a lot of time, but you really need to be tracking that to have an effective open to buy plan that you can action on. And then essentially, based on what you have what your plan is, less what you already have booked on order, at a very high level equals your open to buy, and how much inventory, how much money you have to spend on inventory, looking at it at both retail and cost. Um, as part of a full blown out plan, what you'd also be looking at is your sales forecasts by month, what your planned inventory levels are going to be at the beginning of the month, at the end of the month, what your planned markdowns are going to be. You'd be looking at gross margin, initial markup, and transfers out, transfers in, et cetera. And you'd have a pretty comprehensive view. But again, just to kind of drill it down to the simplest form, it's essentially taking your forecasted merchandise receipts, backing out your own order, and then that gives you how much you have left to spend to buy on a monthly basis. So why is an open to buy plan important? Lots and lots of reasons. The first one is that it directly ties your purchases back to your overall goals and then to your actual performance. So you're not just kind of plodding along in a vacuum, but you really have kind of sales goals and inventory goals, and then you're actually acting upon them in real time, as opposed to 6 months before they actually happen when you're at market. Next, one of the things that I think is super important is it makes you really accountable to your numbers, and then it empowers you to make these educated decisions about your business. So not just about your merchandise, but with kind of all aspects of your business. So for example, a fully blown out open to buy plan can help you make really important decisions about things like scheduling. So if you know that you have more sales that you have planned or more inventory deliveries that you know are coming in, theoretically, that's going to mean that you have more people that you need to put on your schedule. So having that laid out there just helps kind of make some of those bigger business decisions. Same goes for like marketing. If it's going to help you figure out when is the best time to run marketing events. You can look at the open to buy and see when you need to implement marketing initiatives to boost slower sales periods, or if you have a super aggressive sales plan coming up, you can be thinking about marketing events to help kind of boost that, to make that aggressive sales plan more of a reality. It also can help you with bonuses. So, you're giving people monthly goals to be able to work off of, and then keeping everything totally transparent with your staff so that everyone's kind of on the same playing field in terms of the info that they have. So all of those things, it's not just about the merchandise and how much you're bringing in, but really how all of these touch points impact all aspects of your business. And then it just also allows you, while being proactive is a huge benefit of using an open to buy, it also allows you to kind of have those real-time reactions to your business dynamics. So if you're tracking this and you know that, 5 of your deliveries are going to be late, and then you look at your open to buy plan and you realize, wow, I'm not going to make my sales plan because I don't have enough inventory coming in, that could then prompt you to get on the phone with a vendor and see what immediates you can get your hands on, or make some changes with, getting things earlier that you have coming down the pipeline, et cetera. And then obviously it's going to help you be more of a proactive buyer as well, instead of always being reactive. So you're looking forward and you're planning hand in hand with when the market dates are coinciding with when you're purchasing. And then, lastly, I think it really helps to get you thinking about your business holistically. So instead of thinking about each month as its own separate bucket and what's going on, it helps you look at the year in total and understand like how the decisions that you make in August may impact your business in October, November, December, et cetera. So you're getting a full picture of exactly what's going on at all times. The other thing in terms of this kind of holistic approach is that if you really truly embrace open to buy, it's going to really help you get a handle on things like cash flow and truly be in tune with, the timing and the arrival of your goods and why that's important. It gets you looking at things like turnover, and then also markdown dollars and how that impacts your turnover and your inventory levels. And, just allows you to kind of get everything in sync so you can see the big picture of your store, but then also, all of the components that make that up. I just want to note here also that oftentimes, particularly in brick and mortar, you're going to see stores, in your competitive set or just out there as a consumer that look like, a plucked chicken or an overstuffed turkey and just having way too much inventory. And using an open to buy plan and following it, hopefully you're really never going to be that. So, essentially don't let this kind of next store dynamic be your store, because you're constantly monitoring it and the amount of goods that you need to have, you know, to do the volume that you need to do. Um, so next I want to talk a little bit about kind of when to use an open to buy plan, and kind of the different dynamics there. So the first is for annual planning, obviously. This is when you're doing your annual plan for the year kind of from scratch and you're coming up with what those sales and inventory forecasts for the year are going to be. So you have an idea of how much you need to kind of flow in. But then also on a monthly basis, it's super important to be on top of this. A couple days after the month closes, you want to be updating your plan with all of your actuals so you know how you did as compared to how you plan to do. And then this kind of monthly review and audit of the open to buy takes into consideration your sales performance, your current inventory position. Are you over? Are you under from where you thought you were going to be? What your merchandise receipts look like, what you have left outstanding on order, to then help you calculate based on that monthly performance how much additional money you have to spend to fill the store, or potentially how much over you are because you either missed sales or you brought in additional inventory that maybe you shouldn't have done. It basically, when you're looking at it and you can say, all right, I had great sales last month, theoretically I need to buy more, or I had really poor sales, and help you figure out kind of where you're over and then where you're under. But then lastly, it's also a really great mid-month tool. I have a lot of clients that are will pull open to buy just every Monday, just to see how are we trending to plan, what does it look like we're going to do for the rest of the month, who's late, who's not late, and it helps us kind of better understand, are we going to make our month because we're late and everyone's late, or do I need to get on the phone and get some fill-ins ASAP, or do I need to take markdowns? So being able to kind of look to this, mid-month is also super important. One thing I want to mention here, though, that's really important to note with the open to buy is that you want it to be able to liberate you and not constrain you. So a lot of times when people first start working with open to buy, they look at it and they say, okay, for next month I have $3,500 to spend on inventory, and that's all I'm going to spend. And in those types of scenarios, it's a little bit of that constraining dynamic, because you want the information that you're getting from the open to buy to really empower you, but not kind of drive every decision. So you don't want to forget about that kind of art part behind buying. And so, for example, if you go to market and you see a great delivery and you know that according to your open to buy plan, it's going to make you overbought, you don't necessarily want to shy away from that, because you still have to use your gut and your instinct. And if you know that, it's going to put me over inventory, but I know I'm going to sell the heck out of it, you want to go with that gut and really make an educated choice, even if it means that you're over or under the open to buy. So as you kind of think about getting started on it for your own businesses, you always want to make sure that you're, coupling that kind of science and the numbers behind, what you really feel as a business owner is going to be the best decision, and really truly use it as a guideline. So a couple ways that open to buy can change your business. The first one, and I think this is one of the most important things, is that it can help improve cash flow. So a lot of retailers, and you guys may be able to relate to this, always say, I don't get why I'm profitable on paper, but I never have any money in the bank. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that even if your merchandise is sold at a great margin and you're profitable on paper, from a cash flow perspective, you may have spent way too much money on inventory, so you never have cash in the bank. As you guys probably all are aware, inventory is often the largest investment that you have for your business, depending on the type of location you have or the e-commerce business that you have. But good buyers are essentially going to be spending about 50% of their sales in inventory. But oftentimes, when I start working with a retailer who's getting into open to buy, we start pulling things apart and see that Many of them have overspent, 60 to 70% of their sales are on inventory, so they have all this left over. Um, and so what that does is then they have to sell it at markdown or find other ways to liquidate. But the cash flow hit has already happened, and they've sunk that additional money into inventory that they may not have needed to do. So this cash flow improvement is huge if you're really tracking and buying generally to the plan that you think of the amount of inventory that you need. It can make a transformational impact on how much cash your business has. So that's something I think that's super important about using an open to buy. Second thing that it does is I think it helps you really optimize like the merchandise opportunities by category and then also mitigate the challenges. So a lot of times what retailers do, particularly without open to buy, is only look at top sellers. And part of that is because your time is limited, you can only pull certain reports from your system, and you want to get a quick hit on what's selling and what's not selling. But the problem with doing that is that by just looking at top sellers, you're not digging in deeper to look and see how your inventory levels ultimately impact your sales volume. So when you use an open to buy process, you're now aggregating all this data. And what I found is that it really helps retailers have this additional backup and then allows them to look at things more strategically. So I want to give you guys just a really quick example of like how this sales to inventory percentage thing works in terms of giving it visibility into how sales and inventory kind of can work together. So as I had mentioned, when you use an open to buy, you are able to capture more inventory and more data, and then you can better look at performance. And so looking at this percentage of sales to percentage of inventory analysis, in addition to your open to buy, is a really great way to get a handle on like what the different dynamics are. So when looking at this report, just in general, what I tend to look at is pulling, for a certain time period, whatever it may be, by classification, or you can do it by SKU or vendor, or however makes sense to look at your business. You want to look at what the percentage of sales that those, in this case, the categories are contributing to the total business, and then look at that comparison next to what percentage of inventory those different merchandise categories make up. The ultimate goal is that you want to do the highest percentage sales on the least amount of inventory that's comfortable without walking sales. So essentially, you don't want customers to come in and not be able to find what they were looking for. You want to have that balance. But you want to try to figure out like what is that level of inventory that I need to be able to maintain to do the sales I need to do and not have a ton left over at the end of the season, and simultaneously not be walking business because people can't find it on the floor. So I just want to go through a couple of different dynamics with pulling this type of report and analyzing the results. So for this first one, for dresses, if you look at it, we have sales and inventory as a percentage are pretty much the same. So dresses represented almost 20% of the sales for this time period and represented about 20% of the inventory as well. So in this example, you look at it, there's no real red flags, probably doing fine. There's potentially a little wiggle room as then you look at dresses and see, could I potentially experiment with buying a little bit more and see what happens? Does it incrementally lift my sales? Does it do it more so, et cetera? But you can be pretty comfortable looking at this dynamic and feeling okay about what's going on here and just, test the waters about pushing the boundaries. However, then if you look at the next one, which is skirts, and here we have a couple of things going on. So if you pulled the top sellers report, skirts would probably just fall very low on the radar because it's under 5% of your total volume. So you may totally ignore this merchandise category because it's just not contributing the way some of the others are. However, if you then look at it as a percentage of inventory, now you're going to see, wow, this is doing almost 5% of my sales top line, but it's only contributing to 2% of my inventory. And so what this dynamic then shows us is, you know what, like my sales are totally outpacing the inventory investment as a percentage of total inventory. I potentially am walking sales because I don't have enough merchandise on the floor. And so this would definitely be an opportunity to better hone in on to see, you know what, I should probably boost up my inventory here and see what happens. Could I bump skirts up to 10% with, a 5% investment, or et cetera? So this is just a really good example of how looking at top sellers, which again, many people do, kind of hide some of the hidden opportunities that could be there within your business. Then if you look at tops, which is the next one here, this one's much more straightforward in terms of those percentages. So tops is doing 26% of your volume for the given time period, but only represents 8% of the inventory. So here's a very clear example of walking sales. This would probably hit your radar if you're pulling top sellers because of the percentage, but it just shows the dynamic between the two. Alternatively, when we look at t-shirts here, this is a dynamic where you have sales are lower, the percentage of sales are lower than the percentage of inventory. Now, this is somewhat misleading because, again, if you're pulling that top sellers report and you see that 50% of your business is coming out of t-shirts, or almost 50%, if you just looked at that sales history, what that's going to probably instinctually tell you is, wow, I need to buy more t-shirts because this is, killing it for me. But then when you look at it in comparison to inventory, and then you see, well, my investment in inventory is somewhat disproportionate to my sales. So maybe I don't need to buy more. Maybe I need to re-merchandise or do something different to kind of help boost the sales or continue that momentum. But maybe the answer isn't buying more. Next scenario here is with sweaters. If you had looked at this in a vacuum and you just looked at these numbers and were like, wow, sweaters is only contributing 2% of my 2.5% of my sales, and there's a pretty big inventory investment as compared to how it's doing sales wise. When you just looked at this at the numbers, that may indicate that there's an issue. However, it's always important that when you look at these numbers, you dig in deeper. And so then you may pause and say, well, you know what? I just did a huge front load. It's August. It's been super hot. So I needed to bring these goods in to stay competitive, but sales haven't taken off yet. So I'm not going to take a markdown, which may have been your instinct initially if you had just looked at those numbers and seen this disproportionate percentage relationship. And then lastly, somewhat along the same vein, when you look at pants here, you may look and say, wow, this is doing 6.7% of my sales on 11% of my inventory. Again, first instinct may be, do I need to take a markdown? What's going on? Do I need to halt on the future deliveries coming in for a little bit? But then if you kind of take it a step further, you may say, you know what, it doesn't feel like I have a lot of pants on the floor. And so as you start to think about, well, what's going on with this merchandise category, now you may realize, oh, you know what? I have a box of pants that are just sitting in the back. They've been checked in, but didn't get put on the floor. And so potentially that's why the percentage of sales and the percentage of inventory are so off. So these are just kind of examples of why you can't take the numbers at face value, but how they can be a super helpful tool for you to help diagnose kind of what's going on with your business and, then allow you to take it a step further. Okay, next thing about open to buy and how it can help change your business is that it really helps kind of make you accountable to ensuring that your inventory is fresh. When you are doing an open to buy properly, it's going to give you that visibility into how much merchandise is new on the floor and how much is old, as opposed to oftentimes it's very anecdotal and visual when someone's kind of looking at what's going on with the dynamics. So for example, if you had a really good month, you could dig into the open to buy and see what contributed to the performance. And then you could look and say, okay, in the past 30 days, I had a freshness factor of 60%. And another way to say this is, in the past 30 days, 60% of my floor was new deliveries or new merchandise. So that could then help explain why your sales were good, as your customer had a lot of new things to kind of choose from. Conversely, if sales were weak and you went to look at the open to buy and see how the numbers were playing into this, and you just knew that you were waiting on a lot of late deliveries, the fresh factor can help me reinforce that, because you may look at that fresh factor and say, wow, the past 30 days, my fresh factor has only been 10 to 15%. And so that validates, you know what, I really have nothing new to show my customers, and that's probably contributing to why my sales are slower. Um, and then next, something that's really important is obviously if you're able to use an open to buy and better manage the flow of goods coming in, ultimately, if you're able to do that successfully, it's going to minimize that end of season liability merchandise. So, you know, when you have a ton of, obviously, as you guys know, when you're sitting on a ton of goods that can't sell at full price and you have to mark them down, you're going to take that margin hit. Having this additional inventory is obviously going to impact your cash flow directly and your gross margin. Even if you're using an open to buy, the best planners are going to have excess inventory, but the goal is to really minimize this as best as possible. And then the box fox at the end of the day where, you're able to kind of offload some of that inventory if, and give it a second chance of life if your proprietary custom pool is done with it. But ultimately, the goal is to really minimize this as much as possible in the open to buy. If you're able to do it and maintain it, really helps to do that. And then lastly, what open to buy is going to help with is really give you that clarity to your buying decision. So it adds that science to the art of buying, and it's that balance. So it helps you prioritize. And what, I see a lot with retailers when they start using open to buy is that it takes a huge weight off of their shoulders, because now you have this path that's not just rooted in gut, but it has those numbers and that science behind it. So you can just be so much more proactive about your buying decisions. You can be better informed, and then you always have something to go back and reference. And, it's not that stressful. Do I remember what deliveries are coming in when, and how I entered this in the POS, and is it confusing? Did I not even enter it? It just kind of lays it all out there for you. You can go to market, be totally empowered, know what your budget's going to be within a range. It takes away a lot of the stress. So in terms of getting started with open to buy, there's a couple of ways that retailers do it. So you can do it DIY, and a lot of retailers do it this way, and it can certainly work to an extent where it's much more of like a back of the envelope calculation, where you plot out what by month, what your inventory goals are, like how much you need to maintain to be able to do the level of sales that you want to do, so that then you can start figuring out how much inventory to buy on a monthly basis. You can do it in Excel. There's lots of templates out there as well. The one thing with doing it manually is it does take quite a bit of time to maintain, and given that most independent store owners are wearing multiple hats, sometimes it does fall by the wayside. But it's certainly a very helpful tool to do it prior to going to market and to maintain it as best you can. And then the other approach is obviously using a consulting partner. These are firms like Retail Concepts is one of them that helps to work with you on the forecasting, the analyzing, gets everything synced up to your POS. And so you have this data at your fingertips at all times with kind of minimal maintenance in terms of getting the data in. It just becomes an iterative process working together to help forecast what those are going to be. In both scenarios, like a good starting point in terms of what you need to start building the plan is one, you want to be pulling that history by merchandise class or by vendor or whatever the way that makes the most sense for your business. Typically, I like to say that anything should be its own merchandise class if it's doing like more than 5% of your business. Because if it's not, if it's kind of aggregated within a bigger classification, you lose a lot of the rich information that you can get, and it becomes more difficult to grow that class. Conversely, if something's only contributing, 1% of the business top line, and you're investing that much in inventory, it probably doesn't make sense to separate that out as its own merchandise class. So it may be better served as a subclass that you can then watch, and then you do an open to buy on the class level. But anyway, having that history for a couple of years prior to when you're starting your open to buy plan, and then also looking at the sales trends overall by month is super important as a starting point. You're also going to want to pull your profit and loss statements and your balance sheets, because that's going to give you a much better idea of how your sales performance is, ultimately going to be impacting your profitability and your cash flow, and gives you some good starting points there in terms of kind of what kind of assumptions you need to be making. And then lastly, what's super important is to be able to pull your historical purchases at cost and at retail. So you can be looking at, um, what your initial markups are. Are there places where you can squeeze more margin? But then also, how much am I spending on inventory? And how ultimately is this impacting my cash flow? Am I spending 60% of my sales on inventory? Am I spending 40%? And how can I kind of adjust this? So having all these components pulled in together, and your POS can most likely, that in combination with your bookkeeper and accountant, can help you kind of get started here. But this is super important in terms of just kind of setting that initial foundation for your open to buy. Um, and then, armed with this info, then you can start formulating your plan and ultimately start, really taking control of your business by adding that science part behind the art of buying. The art's super, super important, and it's why many, many retailers are still in business today, and why they got into business to begin with, because they had that great instinct. It's just marrying it up with that quantitative is really the way that you can take the business to the next level. So that's what I have for kind of this down and dirty quick overview of open to buy, and then we can open it up to questions if anyone wants to talk through some specific nuances or has questions about their own business.
Well, great. Thank you, Ani, very much. We really appreciate this information. If we could, if anyone from the crowd has questions, feel free to use the chat feature to submit those questions, and we'll read those off so everyone can hear them and have Ani answer those for us. I have a couple here that we can get started with.
Sure.
I know some people are eager to have answered. So you talked a little bit about splitting things out into different categories and things like that. Tell us a little bit about if we're working with a store that may have multiple locations or may have brick and mortar and online channels. Yeah. How would that impact your open to buy planning? And
sure.
Is that something that you segment out by channel and such, or just give us a little guidance in that area?
That's a really great question. So typically, I like to treat each store as its own kind of profit center, if you will. So essentially, you're going to be wanting to look at the open to buy by store as its own entity, because each store has different dynamics. You may have one merchandise classification that's doing really well in one store, not well in the other, or the layouts are different, and so you want to be able to look at the stores as their own, but simultaneously you want to roll it up to a total. So it all kind of has to match so that you can be looking at their performance. But typically, I like stores to be able to have their own open to buy by store, and then also to buy that way as well. Same goes for channel. So e-commerce is often a different animal than brick and mortar, particularly in the smaller store environment. And so those dynamics may be different. And while you certainly may have crossover between those customers, the dynamics, pricing strategy may just be different there. So it's always helpful to split those up. And then, of course, aggregate it all back up to your master plan.
Okay, great. And that sounds like really an opportunity if you are doing multiple locations or multiple channels. Having a consultant partner like yourself could be very helpful in that, as you've gone through that with several different operations in the past. It can help at least provide some groundwork and set up for giving some guidance in that area.
Absolutely.
So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I didn't mention this, is that it also helps you be able to track transfers. So sometimes inter-store transfers are a really big deal, and it gets super messy. But you may know, like if you have a resort store and they're doing really well in one classification, and then you can kind of bring stuff up from the mainland or whatever, and it allows you to better track what's happening with those goods. So being able to kind of flow that through the open to buy becomes huge.
Sure, that definitely makes sense. Obviously important there to track those inter-store transfers. Another question we have for you here is you had spoken a little bit about that there are times that you have to just go with your gut or what you think is going to happen in terms of buying and really going after a popular product or category. Tell us a little bit about using that strategy when really expecting or anticipating some high growth. Any guidelines that you typically use or advise on in terms of, going out on a limb is okay to a certain extent, but maybe not outside of this percentage or something like that. Just a little bit of general guidance in that area.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously depends on the classification, the type of risk that you're looking to take. But at the same time, I think when you know that you're going to be going in and taking one of those risks, like what is your contingency plan? So if, you're buying into a specific color or style of denim that you feel like maybe hasn't taken off in your market, or a particular shoe or something like that, if you know that, if this doesn't work, I'm going to be doing A, B, and C to help kind of either liquidate it or, move it through a different kind of marketing handle or whatever. I think knowing what you're going to do if the risk that you took didn't pan out is going to be super important. And so that's then going to help you identify, like, am I going over my open to buy dollars by $2,000? Or if I go over it by $20,000 or whatever it is, like, am I going to be able to get rid of, worst case scenario, $20,000 worth of inventory and be okay with that? So it's less about the actual number and how much you should push the envelope, but more about like what you're going to do if your risk doesn't pan out. Simultaneously, one thing to kind of help counteract the risk there is typically, like, when you have an open to buy budget, everyone does it differently, but I like to always say you want to leave like 15% of your open to buy always open for like opportunistic real-time buying. So it's very difficult, as many buyers are buying months and months in advance. It's difficult to know exactly what's going to happen, even if you have the best plan. And you're always going to have more kind of intel closer to, that ready to wear season. So if you're always kind of leaving this buffer open, it's going to then help mitigate some of the risks so that you don't go into a situation where you're already very close to being overbought and then you become even more nervous about taking this risk on something that may not work out for you. So taking that somewhat conservative approach becomes very helpful. The flip side of it, though, is that there are some industries and certain vendors, obviously, where you know that you have to commit 100% to that order like 6 months in advance because you can't wait until the season starts or you're going to have missed out on the opportunity. So everything, you're weighing the pros and cons. But setting aside that buffer for those opportunistic buys can really help take away some of that risk in real time.
And those opportunistic buys, are you speaking, specifically towards new items, new merchandise, new trends that are happening, or are you thinking more related to, closeouts from a vendor or things like that?
Those would be like new trends that are happening, or it also simultaneously could be closeouts. So, for example, you may have a vendor that, for whatever reason, didn't do well with a certain style, category, whatever it may be, and they're selling it at off price. And you know that you can scoop that up and have a better margin. And if you feel like you have that potential to sell it at full price, you may take a gamble there and buy that extra because you're going to be potentially able to market at full price and get some additional dollars to then offset other markdowns that you have. So it's really anything outside of the kind of norm, like you have this opportunity to do more business, even though you're, quote, like breaking the rules of open to buy.
Okay, that's great. That's some really good advice there. One last question I think we have for you, and that is, you had mentioned some that you open to buy is to be used in the way that you really want to minimize any excess that you have at the end of the season. However, excess is generally something that still happens even with the best buyers. What are some of your options for getting rid of excess at the end of the season if you do want to free up some additional cash?
So obviously, like concepts like BoxFox, of course, is a great way to be able to find, get rid of stuff and give it a new life to buyers outside of your, initial kind of target customer group. Other ways to do that is obviously going to like consignment. There's a lot less margin there, and it kind of can be a headache to be able to manage and maintain. Other ways of doing it are like, through other liquidation channels like eBay, or even Amazon to some extent. The only problem there is that, you know, it, vendors oftentimes don't want to see their stuff on those sites. And so it just can become a little bit of a conflict there if you want to be selling their full price line day in and day out. Alternatively, taking markdowns, doing marketing and promotional events around that, also thinking outside of the box in terms of how you're going to be promoting those markdowns. So this, here's like an idea that doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but like if you're selling something where fit isn't like a huge issue, like if you're a children's store, you could do some fun stuff like grab bags, like 2, 3, 3T, 4T, and they're just like marked at like a super low price, whatever makes sense. Where customers can't necessarily pick and choose, but they're getting awesome brands at a low price. That wouldn't work for something like denim, obviously, where fit is so variable. But thinking about ways that you can better promote brands that it needs to move, and then also, doing something fun around it. And then the other thing is, when we were looking at that sales and inventory kind of analysis, it's not necessarily just taking it at face value based on sales. So really then digging in to be like, why isn't this working? Is it difficult to find on the floor? Is it sitting that is not appropriate, or, isn't like, it doesn't have synergies with it, or really kind of walking your floor like a customer and seeing, is there something that you're doing as a store owner that's maybe making it difficult to sell that item? Sometimes it just may be price point though, and you have to market. So there's lots of ways to do it. It's just as you get to the end of the season and that liability kind of increases and increases, you know, trying all these small, like kind of fragmented strategies sometimes becomes a little bit overwhelming to manage.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Ani. I think that's all the questions we have for you today. So thank you for joining us and sharing a lot of great information with us about Open to Buy. We really appreciate it.
For having me. And I'm happy to kind of follow up with anyone if they just want to chat one-on-one about some specific questions that they have with their store. And my email is on this last slide. So happy to do that as well.
Okay, thank you, Ani. So if you'd like to take your Open to Buy to the next step, where you need help just getting started with it, you can reach Ani at retailconcepts.com. That's Ani, A-N-I, at retailconcepts.com. And in that process, if you do have excess inventory that you need to get some cash for in the process, we're happy to help you out at BoxFox as well. So help free up any old inventory that you have. We're willing to work with you to find a buyer for that and free up any cash that allows you to buy some new inventory. So thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to next month when we'll have another webinar in our series. And hopefully you can join us for that one as well. Thanks again, Ani, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. Take care.
Take care.